I am a broadcast reporter of 20 plus years and currently working with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District in their communications department as a multimedia journalist. But I've also worked at IdeaStream, WCPN 90.3, and WVIZ as a reporter, and also at WKYC in my 10 years of being here in Cleveland. Well, today's town hall is meant to be an open and honest discussion amongst residents about race. Well, as you all know, Beechwood is a great city to live, and that's why you move there. That's why you're raising your children there, where some are retiring there. It is a very diverse community. From the City of Beachwood's website, the racial makeup of Beechwood is 77.3% white, 13.7% Black, and 7.4% Asian. And it is also made up of different religions. So many might ask, if it's such a diverse community, then why do you need to have this type of conversation in a welcoming and diverse community? Well, some may not think it is as welcoming and diverse as you may think. And that's why we're having this conversation, so that we can see where people are at and how they feel, so that we can have this open dialogue, and then we can start to go from there and figure out what solutions we can come up with, whether it's policy or if it's, hey, let's form a block club so that we can have people feel more welcomed and more at home in their own community. Now, there is no time like the present to have this conversation, because as we all know and we've all witnessed and played out in our own communities and on television, that people are awake and they are listening and they are seeing what's happening in this country. In the wake of George Floyd's death that happened, there have been many, many peaceful demonstrations across the nation and even in Beechwood, to let people know that, hey, we're here, we're listening, and we want some change. And we know that George Floyd is just one name in the long list of names of men and women, Black men and women, who have died at the hands of white police officers. One that definitely hits close to home is Tamir Rice, 12-year-old boy, in 2014. So I hope that you have come to this conversation with an open heart and an open mind and ready to discuss possible change. And as we all know, change doesn't happen overnight, and it's not easy, and it's a little bit uncomfortable. And that's what this conversation is meant to be, so that we can have an open dialogue on where things need to go. So I just want to give you a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Now, there are two ways to communicate during this town hall, because we want to hear from you, the participants who came here tonight and took time out of your busy lives. So you can either write your questions down in the Q&A section of this webinar, or you can raise your hand and by your name, so that we can see that your hand is raised so that you can speak. So we will do our best. Tina Turk will be helping me monitor hands raised and the questions, so that we can get to as many questions as we can during our hour and a half together. Also, just so that you know that this conversation is being recorded, so that city council members, the mayor, can come back and look at this. And if any questions weren't asked, that they can continue to finish that dialogue and those questions long after this conversation this evening happens. So I do have a panelist of people that will be joining me in on this conversation. One of them is Beechwood City Council President James Posh. He took his position in January as City Council President, but he's been a member of the City Council for more than 6 years. And he tells me that he was the youngest person to be elected to the council at the age of just 28. And also Pete Smith. In January of this year, he was appointed as Chair of Civil Service Commission, making him the first Black person to hold that position. And he's been on the commission since 2018. So we will hear welcoming statements from both of them, and then we will get to your questions. And I would like to welcome Council President Posh with opening remarks. Councilman.
Thank you, Ms. Snipes. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you for moderating tonight's town hall. Members of the community, I want to first start out by saying, this town hall's idea originated with the mayor of Beechwood, and many of you will notice that the mayor and the police chief are not here tonight. There is a good reason for that. And as many of you are aware, the mayor is recovering from surgery. He is well, he has returned home, and he is making a speedy recovery. We welcome his return to City Hall shortly. The police chief also retired this past week, and we wish him well in his retirement. And so that is the reason that the panel tonight looks a little bit different than originally intended.
Mr. Smith?
But bear with me. I think we're having technical difficulties. Do you hear feedback?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. Trying to figure this out. Pete, can you go first, and I'm going to try to figure out what's wrong?
Sure, no problem. So you guys let me know if you hear feedback from me as well. Okay. So as Ms. Snipes indicated, my name is Pete Smith. I'm going to be reading some prepared notes because I want to be intentional about these opening comments, as words and intentions matter, particularly in these sensitive times. So I'm present at this forum because of the importance and the delicacy of the community-police interactions, now and always. Disturbing and disproportionately deadly interactions between people of African descent and the police forces of America, they're not new. Our recent national conversations regarding sweeping reform, however, is, and it's long overdue. The Civil Service Commission is responsible for representing the citizens of Beechwood in the hiring process of the fire, EMT, and police departments. This is an extremely important commission for that reason. And as chair of the Civil Service Commission, my vision is to be instrumental in making both fire and police department personnel more reflective of the community that they serve. This will be achieved by hiring and promoting a diverse group of qualified candidates. And diversity here refers to race, ethnicity, and gender. So let me give you a few more details about myself to give you a little bit of context. So I'm the son of a peace officer, specifically a correction officer, and I served as a public servant myself. And so I'm aware of multiple perspectives. And so I think I bring something interesting to the table, to this conversation and both the Civil Service Commission. Secondly, and obviously, I'm a person of African descent who's lived on the planet for more than half a century and in Beechwood for more than a decade. I'm an involved parent and an involved neighbor. My appointment to the position was not an accident, but a deliberate and a thoughtful act on the part of the city to bring different perspectives to all aspects of government. And I think the city is really to be congratulated on that. In closing, let me just say this. The dynamics and subjects that we're undoubtedly going to come to light tonight are centuries old, and we're not going to solve them in 90 minutes. However, I want to encourage us all to actively listen without assumptions regarding what we believe we do and do not know. And with that, I'll turn it back over to James.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And hopefully I've fixed the technical difficulties on my end. Tonight's an important night because the nation is at an inflection point when it comes to conversations about race and equity and inclusion, and Beechwood is no different. We are a microcosm of what we have seen across the country. But in order to approach tonight's conversation, I think first we have to go back into our past. And we have to look at the past of both this region and our city. Because when you look at the region as a whole, and you go back to the 1940s, after about 140 years of uninterrupted growth in the city of Cleveland, Cleveland's white population began to decline in the 1940s because after World War II, white GIs got low-cost federal home loans to move into the suburbs, where Black guys did not. And that is another American history of discrimination being written into the law. What makes Beechwood particularly unique during that time period, Beechwood was not a suburb yet. It was a small village with a few hundred people that lived in Beechwood. And around that time, in 1948, Fairmount Temple bought a 32-acre plot of land where the temple currently sits now to build. And a debate started amongst the people of that village that the sudden proposal of a large synagogue with 1,800 families sparked worries amongst the community that, quote, the demographic change would be detrimental to public safety, welfare, and convenience of the village, was an actual statement made during a village city council meeting. In May of '52, the village of Beechwood actually filed a lawsuit to prevent the temple from being built. And residents woke up to a white supremacist newspaper called The Plain Truth in their mailbox with a message that said, "The battle is on. No longer should we sit idly by and watch our country be taken from us. Act now, let not the Jew plan succeed." A couple of years later, in 1954, when the case went all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court, the Supreme Court ruled that the synagogue in Fairmount could be built, forever changing the future of our city. And then within the next 10 years, the city population jumped from about 1,000 to over 6,000, and a bunch more Jewish institutions and synagogues moved into the city of Beechwood. If you fast forward to the present, in the early 2000s and in 2010, when I moved to this area and then this city, Beechwood started to change again in a good way. It became a more diverse community. Instead of a community that was 98% white, as you heard from Ms. Snipes in the beginning, it became a community where a quarter of its percentage were minorities, were Black and Asian, and that's only increasing. And I'm sure this next census is going to show that over a third of our community is no longer white. And we need to embrace that change and that diversity. And when I first moved here, you started hearing comments, you know, the city doesn't look the same, or do we ID people who are on the basketball courts, or really maybe we don't need a new football field or new lights on the football field because we don't know what that would do to property values, were comments that I would hear from several people as I started my term on city council. And I think it's crucial that we look at our past in order to understand how to be better than that in our future. And so we need to learn from those mistakes instead of repeating them. And so when we talk about embracing our diversity, now more than ever is a time to act, to use all the tools as a city that we have available to us to eliminate inequity, discrimination, racism. And we know that we could create a community where every member of this community could thrive. We need to take the energy that we saw at our rally for racial justice, where we had over 1,000 residents present, and we need to use that rallying cry to create real, sustainable change. And so tonight is the beginning of that process. And as Ms. Snipes said, and as Mr. Smith said, we're not going to solve our problems or the world's problems tonight, but we are going to start listening. There's no way to solve a problem without listening to our shared experiences, to listening to your lived experiences. That's where the real work begins. So tonight I ask you to share your stories of what it's been like for you to live and to work in the city of Beechwood, what it's been like for you to raise your kids in the city of Beechwood. What concerns do you have? What hopes do you have? I will try my best to answer some of your questions tonight, but I also want to do a lot of listening tonight. All of my council colleagues are on the phone this evening, as well as several members of the school board, our school board president, Dr. Weiss, our school board members, Megan Walsh and Jillian DeLong. And as your elected officials, we're here to listen. because we know that's where real change starts. And so with that, I want to kick it back over to Ms. Snipes so that we could start this evening's town hall.
Thank you. And so I just want to remind everyone, if you do have a comment, a question, just make sure that you have your hand raised by your name. I know this is kind of a technical thing with COVID-19. We have to stay away, so we have to do this virtually. So just make sure that we can see that your hand is raised so that we can see that you want to say something, or you can put your question in the comment section and I will read your question to the panel so that they can answer your question if it is a question. So, and if you are speaking, just know that there'll be somewhat of a time limit so that we can get to as many questions as possible. But Council President Pasch, while we're waiting for someone to raise their hands or to ask a question, let me ask a question. So in light of everything that we have seen nationally when it comes to the death of George Floyd and other Black men and women, what has the City Council, the City of Beachwood, what are you guys prepared to do to make sure that something like that doesn't happen in your city? Are you prepared to declare racism as a public health crisis? We'll start with that question.
The answer is twofold, right? It's what could we as a city council do and what could the administration do? You know, I know that although he might not be here today, I know that in the immediate aftermath of George Floyd's murder and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, that the mayor and I spoke continually throughout those days and weeks, and that he took President Obama's 4-step pledge in the immediate aftermath, which involves the review of your police use of force policies with your chief of police. Then the second step is to engage your community by driving a diverse range of input, experiences, and stories in your review. Third step, report the findings for your review to your community and seek feedback. And fourth, reform your community's police use of force policies. And, you know, in our use of force policy, the first sentence of that policy says that the use of force policy is continually evolving and needs to be added to over time. And so those are one of the things that we will discuss both as an administration, as a city council. I also asked my council colleagues to start emailing me to be proactive, to create a comprehensive list of ideas that we could institute as a council to make us a better community that embraces that diversity and inclusion and prevents something like the likes of what we've seen happen in some of these horrific situations across our nation. And you specifically asked about the racism as a public health crisis. Multiple members of council and myself have spoken about declaring racism as a public health crisis as a resolution in front of city council. And I expect that to be one of the things that gets brought up in the coming weeks.
Okay, great, thank you. And so I just, one other house note, Tina, if you could help me out, I think I gave the wrong directions on how someone can raise their hand. Can you help me in letting them know exactly how they can raise their hand? I thought I just saw someone raise their hand, but might have they put it down, but can you help me with that?
Yes, I had Craig raise his hand just to make sure that there was no issue with that the participants could do that as a test. But the residents have to click on the button that says participants, and once they see that, they can find their name and then they will be able to raise their hand. So they have to click on participants first. Great, thank you. And I see that Leslie Clark, she has raised her hand, so let's hear what Leslie has to say. Okay, hold on, because I have to open up for my computer. You have to bear with us. This technology is all new for some of us, especially me. Okay.
Well, Darrielle, I also think Leslie typed her question in as well.
Okay.
I was going to say Leslie's question is typed, and then Charles has his hand raised.
Okay, well, let's go with Leslie. I see this is for Pete Smith. What is being done to assure that current police are of the mind that POC are as deserving as respect as and equal treatment as whites? People of color, POC.
So Leslie, thanks for the question. So I'm going to just reiterate what the Civil Service Commission does. And we are responsible for being the voice of the community with regard to hiring EMT, fire, and police. And so I guess your question is, as chair of that commission, what can we do? And the best thing that we can do, and what we have been doing, and what my vision as chair is to hire, to interview, and to hire a diverse slate of individuals. So that's a group of individuals who reflect the community at large. So these are going to be individuals who are diverse in terms of gender, and they're diverse in terms of ethnicity as well. I can tell you that the first set of interviews that I was a part of was a couple of years back. And immediately after participating in those interviews, I did debrief with the mayor, and we did some re-engineering, and the slate of candidates, the pool of candidates became much more diverse. So I know that both departments are looking and searching. I know that I've spoken with former police chief Haba about some of the challenges of getting people of color, whether they be African American, Asian, whatever, to apply for these positions. It can be difficult, but I know the city has made that extra effort, and I guarantee you that I'm being vigilant.
Great, thank you. And then Charles would like to add to the conversation, if we can unmute him. Wait, you're still muted. Oh, there you go. Hi, Charles. Oh, now back to me.
Okay, I can't unmute.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay. So the question is, what proportion of police people now are not of white color? And what might happen in the future when a new police chief is going to appear? Are there any Jewish policemen? I don't think so.
So the first question is, I don't know if there are any Jewish, or I guess it's your last question. I don't know if there are any Jewish policemen. I believe, and James, maybe you can help me out here.
Yeah.
I believe that there are a total of 5 officers that are people of color.
Yep.
Is that correct?
So,
yes.
Yeah. So, Charles, what I can tell you is I don't know the amount of officers that are of the Jewish faith. I know that last night I was speaking to Officer Appel, who is our community liaison officer and the head of our training programs. He is Jewish. And I know we have 5 officers out of 46 total who are officers who are people of color.
Okay.
That's good.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Charles.
So when people were able to register for this event, they also had the opportunity to submit questions a little bit easy before, but actually I see that Marie has a question. Sorry, I'm trying to monitor a different screen. So this question that was written by Marie says, hello, I am from a nearby city. My question is, how can cities like mine that are not as diverse as Beechwood take baby steps to start becoming more inclusive? I am concerned that even cities with a low percentage of minorities can do more to make people of color feel welcome. So, not sure. She didn't name the city, the nearby city, but she wants to see. She's using, obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but she wants her community to be as diverse as Beechwood.
Yeah, that's a great question.
So Ms. Snipes, what I would say is, first off, I think sometimes it's important to not be limited by our geographic boundaries. So both the challenges and as well as the the challenges and the growth of diversity is an area-wide thing that that we all as neighboring communities need to embrace together. And I would say to Marie, to please start now having these conversations. Have them with your neighbors, have them with your friends. Go to your city hall, contact your city council members, your mayor, and say, I attended this town hall. We should have conversations like this, because without talking, that's where we have to start. And if we don't start the conversation, there's nowhere to go. So that's where I would start. But thank you, Marie.
Yes, thank you. And Charles, can you lower your hand? This is another housekeeping, so that we can see other people. Okay, so now we see Ben Peerless has a question. Good evening, Ben.
Hi, good evening. How are you all?
Great.
My question is, are there any activities or events planned in the near future that will promote what we are beginning to promote tonight in the city of Beechwood and maybe other places to help them model off of us?
Hi, Ben. Thank you for your question. What I would say is the difficulty right now is when you talk about a series of events. Obviously, with COVID, we are staying away from in-person events for the time being. Hopefully, that changes at least in the distant future. But what we do view tonight as is the first part of a series of community-wide conversations. Right? We plan on coming back to the community with solutions after we hear from many of you about changes that we're going to make. I spoke to the president of the school board this afternoon about a joint town hall between the city and the schools to answer questions that many of you might have that are diversity or equity related in our schools. And we've been working together now for about a year. The schools invited the city to start to have a combined conversation about biases in the community and diversity and how to overcome those biases. And they invited a former Beechwood alum who's a professor at Stanford who specializes in bias to come back to Beechwood, and we've been working with them on that initiative. And I continue to be excited about our working relationship with the schools moving forward. And so, yes, this is the first of many things, Ben, that I think you're going to see.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And then
working together now for about a year. The schools invited the city to start to have a combined conversation about biases in the community and diversity and how to overcome those biases. And they invited a former Beechwood alum who's a professor at Stanford who specializes in bias to come back to Beechwood, and we've been working with them on that initiative. And I continue to be excited about our working relationship with the schools moving forward. And so, yes, this is the first of many things, Ben, that I think you're going to see.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And then also, if you could unraise your hand so that we can see others.
Sure.
Thank you. And so just as I was saying a little bit earlier, some people had the opportunity to email their questions. So I have a couple of emailed questions that I would like to ask to the panelists. So one is also, if you could unraise your hand so that we can see others.
Sure.
Thank you. And so just as I was saying a little bit earlier, some people had the opportunity to email their questions. So I have a couple of emailed questions that I would like to ask to the panelists. So one is, does Beechwood Police employ or plan to employ social workers to respond to calls involving a mental health crisis? That question came to us from Heidi. Does Beechwood Police employ or plan to employ social workers to respond to calls involving a mental health crisis? That question came to us from Heidi Solomon.
So that's an excellent question. And it's not something, it's not a role that the Beechwood Police Department officially had taken on. But I think given all the conversation nationally, it's an excellent recommendation. I know.
Solomon.
So that's an excellent question, and it's not something. It's not a role that the Beechwood Police Department officially had taken on, but I think, given all the conversation nationally, it's an excellent recommendation. I know Mr. Pasch and I have had this conversation, and maybe you can refer Mr. Posh to some of the. I know Mr. Posh and I have had this conversation, and maybe you can refer Mr. Posh to some of the. I know you've heard about and maybe even witnessed a few incidents where the police have acted with regard to some of these social events or social situations.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Smith. So, currently the city does not have social workers that work on.
Heard about and maybe even witnessed a few incidents where the police have acted with regard to some of these social events or social situations.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Smith. So, currently the city does not have social workers that work on staff or work with our police department. But in talks with our police department, some of the things that I have found out is, staff or work with our police department. But in talks with our police department, some of the things that I have found out is, we intervene frequently in issues where someone is in crisis to take them to the emergency room for evaluation. And we have the ability, our officers have the ability to fill out emergency admissions forms. And that happens more frequently than you would think, especially with the amount of health facilities in the city of Beechwood. We intervene frequently in issues where someone is in crisis to take them to the emergency room for evaluation. And we have the ability, our officers have the ability to fill out emergency admissions forms. And that happens more frequently than you would think, especially with the amount of health facilities in the city of Beechwood, about roughly 300 times a year. And so, de-escalation in those situations is crucial, about roughly 300 times a year. And so, de-escalation in those situations is crucial. How you approach people is crucial. Our officers in those cases do not transport people in police vehicles, right? We transport in ambulances in an attempt to de-escalate the situation. But the nation is having a conversation. How you approach people is crucial. Our officers in those cases do not transport people in police vehicles, right? We transport in ambulances in an attempt to de-escalate the situation. But the nation is having a conversation right now about the use of skilled social workers who go to school specifically in these, to work in these situations, to work with the individuals who are struggling from a variety of issues. And I think it's an area that the administration can explore along with City Council in the future.
Great. We have a written question from Laura Morello, which is, beyond hiring more people of color on the police fire force, what efforts will be in
right now about the use of skilled social workers who go to school specifically in these, to work in these situations, to work with the individuals who are struggling from a variety of issues. And I think it's an area that the administration can explore along with City Council in the future.
Great. We have a written question from Laura Morello, which is, beyond hiring more people of color on the police fire force, what efforts will be instituted to ensure all personnel receive anti-racism training? Will police be required to have at least an associate's or bachelor's degree? And is chokehold instituted to ensure all personnel receive anti-racism training? Will police be required to have at least an associate's or bachelor's degree? And is chokehold banned? So it's 3 questions.
So that's a lot. So again, we're listening a lot. I think those are all great recommendations. I know that the chokehold has been banned, and I know that Mr. Pasch is prepared to actually read
Banned. So it's 3 questions.
that. Well, so that's a lot. So again, we're listening a lot. I think those are all great recommendations. I know that the chokehold has been banned, and I know that Mr. Pasch is prepared to actually read read the language in the policies regarding the chokehold. With regard to training, it is ongoing, and again, this is a forum where we're looking to have the community sort of direct us as to what things you believe you would like to see to help the police serve you better and more reflect the community. So I think those are great recommendations. So no, we don't have chokeholds are absolutely banned. Currently, associates and baccalaureate degrees are not required. But I guess I would be curious to understand why it is we believe those things are necessary to serve the public.
Council President?
Yeah, so I'll add, because I know Mr. Smith said that I would talk specifically about our use of force policy. We do have a very specific use of force policy. It's in here. I talked about the first sentence of that policy earlier this evening that says this policy recognizes that the use of force by law enforcement officers requires constant evaluation. And then, section 2F of the policy addresses your specific question on chokeholds, where it says the use of a neck restraint or chokehold is considered deadly force as it pertains to the provisions of this policy. A neck restraint chokehold is not authorized as a control technique for members of this department, period. So that answers that question. You also specifically asked about anti-racist training, both for police officers, but also I think you also asked the question, about everyone as a whole. And so, I can tell you I've met with our HR director, and we've talked about different trainings that can be instituted in the city of Beechwood that currently don't happen, such as anti-racist training. I know our police force is actually currently going through implicit bias training, but that is different than anti-racist training. And we will work on both fronts about what trainings we are missing and how we could do better.
And there's a quick follow-up question from Laura Morello that relates to this answer, so that's why I'm skipping ahead. But her question is about the degree. I read that police with at least an associate's use excessive force 40% less than those without and exhibit less racist attitudes. Have either one of you heard of that? Do you know that to be, have you read what she read? Is that something that you guys are also looking for the police force?
That's good data. No, I haven't read that. I'm not familiar with the data. I don't know that it's all that surprising. I think one of the things that we need to consider when we talk about level of education is that there needs to be a commensurate level of compensation. And I think that's one of the systemic issues, not just here in Beechwood, but nationally, is that people who attain 2- and 4-year degrees, they want to be compensated for those degrees. So, it's a broader problem, and I think one that we should consider strongly here in Beechwood, as well as the region and the nation. It's a good point.
Council President, would you like to add anything?
No, listen, I have not read that specific study, but I agree with Mr. Smith. Those statistics do not surprise me. And I think, across the board, right, we have to continue to work on recruiting the best and the brightest police officers possible to come work in the city. We continue to strive for that whenever there is an opening in the police force.
Great, thank you. And we have a hand raised by Abdul, if we can unmute him. Your mic is open. Hello? Where'd he go? Oh, no, okay. Your mic is open. You can talk now. Now it's muted. Okay, now it's unmuted. Can you speak so we can try to hear you? Okay. While we work out that issue, we still want to hear from you. I'm going to go to one of the questions, the written questions. I'm just trying to find the next one. Where is it? Okay, this one's from FE. Are mental health assessments for police officers done pre-employment as well as annually, or some type of follow-up during tenure on the force?
I know that there are pre-employment psych evaluations, and you cannot be hired without them. I'm uncertain, to be very frank, of the frequency with which there are psych evaluations for current officers.
Mr. Smith, so I know there are pre-evaluations as well. As to how often or how ongoing they are, that is an answer that I'll get from the administration and from the acting chief, and we will get back to you and post that online. And I should say that too, for any question that we don't have an immediate answer to because that the head of the administration is not here or the police chief is not present, we will get an answer and we will post those answers online.
Okay. So SJ Taylor is next with their question. Can we have them unmuted? Good evening.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Sherry.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi. Thank you for putting this together. I've been living in Beechwood, golly, since '96. So it's been a while. My 3 kids came through the school system. Not at the beginning. We were in a neighboring suburb at first, and then I grew up in the area probably about 15 minutes away. So in a Cleveland school, all Black, and I came through the time. I'm 63. I came through the time where it was total systemic racism. I hear that word bannered about a lot. This is systemic, that's systemic. The way they're describing it is totally not systemic. The way it's being described in a lot of cases, I can tell you from experience what systemic racism really is. And I hate to say that, but and I also incurred it when I went to college here in Cleveland. Again, Cleveland historically is a very racist city. And I don't throw that word around. People throw that word racism around a lot when it's just a difference of opinion. So, it's more or less. So what my concern about Beechwood is, listening to the news, not having a lot of people who are living in Beechwood, who've grown up in Beechwood, who've not really been exposed to Blacks while they were growing up. Matter of fact, I know some people have come here just to escape it, and so the biggest issue that I have, what I'm starting to see, not necessarily in Beechwood, is that people are overreacting. Where there's not a problem, they want to fit in the same mold as some city, say maybe something like Minneapolis, or you can start naming cities. And my concern is that we can end up, because we're trying to prove that we're a diverse city, and because there's not necessarily enough or the right people who really experience through life experience what racism really looks like, not just because somebody's a different color and they have a difference of opinion and then called a racist, that they tend to overreact. Because I also seen that, and it can end up changing this city really, really quickly. And I mean that. Like I said, I'm 63. I have a lot of life experience that I wouldn't wish on anybody as far as racism is concerned. In the Cleveland area, even Shaker Heights, some people know Shaker Heights is a very racist city and school system. All you have to do is, I even went to the city council when they actually erected barriers between the black side of Shaker and the Shaker Heights border. Those borders are still there. I went there to protest. Don't put these borders up, to separate the two communities. They did it anyway. And then they did it within the school system. Some of the things to look for in the school system as parents, this is the kind of stuff that they would do. They would have the council people, like if a kid, matter of fact, it happened at Beechwood with my daughter. She wanted to be a doctor. But of course, you have those teachers and those counselors. Well, I don't think it was a counselor. I think it was a teacher. Oh, nurses make good money too. The reason she knew, she was about the 8th grade. The reason she knew what to look for is because it happened to my cousin, who's 7 months older than me. We told her some of the things, some of the little soft racism, and so that kind of stuff. It happened to her in Beechwood. We also had a teacher, a sports teacher, because they were in all the sports. He would yell at the black kids while they were on the field, and then he would apologize after everybody's gone. Oh, that's not really what I meant. See, that's racism. You see? And there's other things, and I'm not going to hold you all up, but I just want to make sure. I've seen people try to show that they're really show that they're not racist, and they go so far and asking people who just know it from reading books and taking classes and getting degrees and taking courses in diversity, and they have no clue the damage that they're actually doing trying to solve a problem, because they have no idea. They just got a piece of paper that says they took this training, let me go and start training people on diversity, and it's totally off the mark. So hopefully we're not going to deal with that. We also don't need special treatment. We're trying to meld into the melting pot. We don't want any special treatment. No extra rules. We just want to be like, just make everybody equal. That's all we want.
Well, Sherry, thank you so much for your comment. And I know that the gentlemen are eagerly awaiting to respond to your comment. I'll start with City Council President Posh. What would you like to say in response to her comments?
So first off, Sherry, I am sorry for the racism that you have experienced in your life. No matter where it took place, no matter what city it was in, it wasn't acceptable. And for that, I'm incredibly sorry. When it comes to the city of Beechwood, right, I respectfully, I don't think that anyone here has been overreacting in either the city government or in the general populace. I think it's meeting the moment, as I said, that we are in as a community and as a nation, and figuring out what we could do better. Because while I think we're a great city, we are not without our faults, and we are an increasingly diverse city, and I think that's all a positive. But we have to understand where we're not doing well by talking and having these conversations tonight to figure out some solutions that can be put in place. And I don't think those solutions mean that we're overreacting. I think it just means that we are meeting the moment that we are in as a community and as a country. But I know that Mr. Smith wants to elaborate, so I'll also pass it off to him.
Yeah, thanks. And I also want to thank that participant for her comments and her sentiments. Racism, the term, and the practice is a slippery slope, and it's big, and it's old, about as old as the country. I've had many conversations about what Beechwood is and is not as a city. I am not an expert on the subject of racism, although I've been a Black man in America now over 55 years, and I've seen my share. What I will say is this. We know the two forms of racism that we see a lot are overt racism, and we see covert and systemic racism. And I think, if I could say, sometimes the covert racism might be easier to identify and to address because it's very obvious and in your face. What I think is tricky about what we're attempting to do here in Beechwood is to address the things that we don't always see, the subtle things. And so when we speak in terms of systemic racism and systemic bias, hiring practices and policies that don't jump off the page necessarily, but do disenfranchise already marginalized groups. And so I would just ask, as James did, that we all really take a really close look, not so much to criticize the city, but to be critical of the fact that the city resides in Northeast Ohio, which is a part of the United States, where we're experiencing some pretty undeniable dynamics at this point. So thanks for the comments.
Thank you. And thank you, Sherry, yes, for your comments. And if you could lower your hand, that would be helpful so we can know who's next in speaking. We're going to try Abdul again. I see that he's still there, and see if we can hear you this time. Can you unmute yourself, or Tina, can you help him? Hello? Do you hear us? Can we hear you? Now he's muted again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Hello.
All right, thank you. Technology.
I know.
First of all, I would like to thank the city for putting this thing together. It's very encouraging, and I consider it, one of the first step to start, some incremental improvement based on what everybody brings to the table here. I like the best part of what I think Mr. Pasch said about, transparency and things of that nature. And I do believe, transparency is the key, to everything. Again, this is also a tough conversation, and that transparency, what comes from there might also be tough to everybody else, but it's what is right now. And I'm sure people will understand, and it will give officials to start working through those things. Now, I've been living in Beechwood for about 12 years now. I've seen quite a bit, mostly on the school side. In terms of the city part of it, nothing too much bad that I've experienced. Overall, I have a good experience, but not so much as far as the school system is concerned. I think there's a lot that they can do on their part. On the last meeting that the school board had in the nature of the diversity aspect, I did pose a question, and I've been posing that question and request from the board, the superintendent over time, saying, okay, is there a thing that, they can be sharing with the community in terms of metrics, transfer to say, where the school is, what they're trying to achieve, and what they have to achieve. And those things can be shared with the community, because it doesn't matter whatever the effort the school puts, if those things are presented to the community will have more faith. It's transparency. They say, okay, this is what we're trying to attain, and we have achieved 5% from that. Next year, another 5%. Those are incremental improvement. I think the people who, I think, probably they are not getting the best share.
Hello? Did we lose him? Okay, I think we lost him, but do you gentlemen want to comment on what we heard so far about his
Sure.
comments?
first off, thank you, Abdul, for both being here tonight and for speaking. I know I agree. I think many of my council colleagues, or all of my council colleagues, and this administration agree that transparency is the key to the beginning of most conversations. And so, I think it's not just figuring out as a city where we are transparent, it's figuring out what information the public already doesn't have and trying to get them that information as well. I think many of my council colleagues have reached out to me in the last several weeks to figure out what we can be publishing online that's currently not online, so that you have access to things without even asking or making an official public records request. You just have the ability to, I have a question, I want to see what the use of force policy is. I could just go to the website and pull it up, right? So I appreciate the sentiment that as a city, you think we're doing well. And I would say I appreciate that, and I know we could still do better. As far as some of the concerns that you might have had in your 12 years in the community with the schools, I will say what I said at the very beginning, which is what I am promising is a follow-up forum that we will do in conjunction with the school district, so that the appropriate people and leadership positions for the school district are there to answer your real concerns and your real questions. And so I appreciate it, Abdul, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Great. And we have a written question from Charles, which is there coordination amongst the police departments in the county? Mr. Smith, do you know?
Yes. Yes, there is, in terms of many things. So there are, there's training that goes across municipalities. There are instances where there are emergency services that call for a variety of, these municipalities to cooperate together. So the short answer is yes. I'm guessing that sort of the root of the question is, is there training across police departments that deals with this issue of equity and, equal treatment? And that I don't know, but I think it's a good suggestion that I'm writing down. Mr. Pasch, would you know about that? I don't know.
Yeah, so I know we work with other departments and we have mutual aid agreements with other departments across the geographic area that we work closely with. I also know that many of the trainings are run out of a variety of different police departments. We're also a member of the EDGE unit, which involves, right, it's a specialty police unit that involves several of the surrounding communities in the eastern suburbs. And listen, I know we do a lot of annual and biannual training, whether that's CPR training, active shooter training, yearly ethics training, driving simulation training, shoot, don't shoot simulation trainings, implicit bias training now. I don't know how many of those trainings are across municipal boundaries, and how many of them are just solo in the city of Beechwood. But it's something I'll look into. And like I said, since I don't know the exact answer to this one, that's something that we could post online.
Ms. Snipes, does he have, is he willing to follow up? And I am curious about the root of that question. Does he want to see training across boundaries that covers off on this area in particular, or was he just curious?
Abdul, can you unmute yourself so that you can answer that question? Okay, let's try it again.
You hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Oh, did somebody ask me a question?
Yes, Mr. Smith asked your question. Mr. Smith, would you like to ask that question again so he can hear it? You're muted, Mr. Smith.
The question was actually, it was a written question. It wasn't so much for Abdul.
Oh, I thought it was. I'm sorry.
I was asking whether or not that written question, if we could receive a follow-up or clarification, whether or not they wanted to know very specifically about an area of training across boundaries.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies, Abdul, sorry. We're gonna, if you can follow up with that question, we'll get back to it. But in the meantime, let's go to Steve Moss. He has his hand raised for another question, and we will wait to get a follow-up to that written question. My apologies.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. You know, when we think about the need for diversity in this city, you know, one needs to only look further than the composition of our own city council. And just, I've been a Beechwood resident for almost a quarter century, but it's astounding that for decades, Beechwood City Council was comprised of members who shared the same skin color and, with rare exception, shared the same party. Now, fast forward to today. You know, I personally think our city is better off with someone like June Taylor on city council. Diversity certainly makes us stronger. But the real question is, why not take this a step further and address the issues of leadership? To date, Beechwood has never had a non-white city council president or a non-white mayor. Considering that city council, not the electorate, selects its own president, James Pasch could take the appropriate step of stepping down from his current role, and he can set the stage for council to select Councilwoman Taylor as the president. Now, somewhat unusual, but this selfless act would certainly further enhance Beechwood's reputation as a welcoming city. Aren't we calling ourselves a welcoming city? Especially in today's environment. My personal opinion is the time is now for change, and it would be a great solution for progress in our community. So why not make the change now? Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Council President Posh.
Thank you, Mr. Moses. Listen, I know Mr. Moses brings up the idea of the welcoming city because I introduced a resolution making Beechwood a welcoming city in the wake of President Trump's immigration orders, saying that all immigrants are welcome in the city of Beechwood, which is still a resolution that I am proud of today. I also, I'm very proud that Ms. Taylor is a council colleague and that we can, and I was part of her appointment. I was proud to support her in her campaign, and diversity across the elected field, as well as directors across the city, needs to be a priority. As to your question as to whether or not I will resign as council president, I will not.
Okay, we have a question from Scott, and he is asking, do our police officers wear body cameras? And if not, why?
I could take that. Body cams are mandatory in the city of Beechwood, and every officer is equipped with them. That's legislation that passed, I want to say, towards the end of my first term on council. So I want to say about 3 to 4 years ago. That policy was instituted, but there are mandatory body cams and there are mandatory dash cams in the car. Thank you, Scott, for your question.
And let's go to Fatima. Fatima, she has a comment or a question. Good evening. I'll wait for her to be unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I wanted to say, I wanted to agree with, or at least address Peter's question, not the question, the comment that he made about overt and covert racism. I think that we should not be concerned whether racism is covert or overt here. We are really addressing the systemic issue of equality and racism. And I believe that that's the only piece that we have control over. We cannot go after racists. We see them on social media. We've seen the comments and the backlash from the rally. So people actually reveal themselves as racist. But until we take control as a community of the systemic issues and actually deal with them hands-on and allow for the community to have a voice in it, this is how we can eliminate the racists. And also on Mr. Moses' comment. I don't know that I want James to resign. We've met, and you came around to my home, and you talked about why you are there and so forth. And so I, as a community member, I feel comfortable that you are in that position. I did not know your political views and so forth. I just expected you to, if you're going to step up, if you're taking the job, that you will do what is in the best interest of the city. And I don't know that we should necessarily just jump off and put people in because they're Black female or they have 3 legs or whatever it might be. I think that if we're working in the interest of the city, we have to make strategic decisions in a timely fashion. And we cannot just go with whatever is flowing in the rest of Cleveland or in the United States. I think, as Peter says, that we are just a microcosm of the United States, but we also have the luxury of really embracing a really good city, a safe city, and working together and having the community have a voice on the same platform with you guys. I feel that this is a sense of empowerment for me, and that, you know, I pay a lot of taxes. I travel a lot, but I still have to pay my city taxes, and I appreciate the services that I've gotten. And I can safely say, and I think it's really important. I'm not saying that I support the police or whatever the police is doing, but I personally can tell you that people have called the police on my son. The police have stopped me probably once, and I cannot tell you that they've just been really courteous to me and also to my son, who's a young Black man. And we are from South Africa. So this racism stuff, this apartheid, it's just apartheid 2.0. So, you know, I'm fairly insightful about these things. And I really just wanted to share my, my voice. And I appreciate that you have created this platform. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick housekeeping. If you've already spoken, if you could lower your hand so then we know who else needs to speak, that would be helpful for me. Thank you. Next, we have Carrington and Allison Peavy. They want to speak. I don't know if it's Carrington or Allison, but hello, good evening.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, do I introduce myself or do I just go right into it?
You can go right into it.
Okay, I think in Beechwood, I think this is a very good first step in all the kind of conversations we're having and steps we're making to change. But I think that we need to start using different words other than equity and start using some different language. I think that we frequently use equity when we use race talks like this to kind of like broaden it and I think that we kind of need to call it like it is, in my opinion. So I think some better words are microaggressions, racial discrimination, prejudice, and, blatant racism. I think that equity is a good term because there are some students in the Beechwood City Schools District that do need different programs and different ways that they need help. But I think that when we start attacking this head on and using the right words and better words, I think that we can educate and get rid of that discomfort that we have around this situation and start to do better for our community. I also think that we need more transparency within the city council and school board in general. I think we need a lot of more openness, and we need to know like what's being voted on and what's going on more so than kind of just like receiving things on the back end on some things. That's all I have to say.
So Darrielle, if I could, I first of all want to thank Carrington, and I know Carrington is a student. Hi, Carrington. Thank you for calling in. We appreciate it. You mentioned some words, and you mentioned equity. You mentioned microaggressions. Can you maybe tell us why it is you prefer some of those other terms versus equity?
I would prefer those terms because I think that it's more specific, and they are things that I've experienced while being in the Beechwood City School District. I think when we say equity, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that equity means that you're giving people resources based on what they need, which is 100% correct and what we need to do. But I do think that we need to use other words because some circumstances, I think certain circumstances within this district can be changed. Like kids should not have to worry about walking through the neighborhood. Kids shouldn't have to worry about coming to school. I think that we can change these certain circumstances instead of just applying resources for different groups.
Thank you.
Council President Posh, do you want to add anything?
No, just, Carrington, I hear what you're saying about transparency, and the same way that I said earlier, I will, wherever we are falling short on that front, I will work with my colleagues to make sure that we continue to do better. And I appreciate your courage in speaking up tonight, but also at the past, several events that I've seen you at. So thank you, Carrington, for being a strong young leader. Appreciate you.
Yes, thank you. I see that Councilwoman June Taylor has her hand raised. Good evening, Councilwoman.
Good evening, and it's an honor to speak with everyone, and it's an honor to participate in this process. I wanted to address not only the panelists, but also the citizen that had some comments earlier that mentioned me and the council president position, and I felt I would be remiss if I did not address those comments directly. Let me state that I'm truly honored and proud that not only was I selected by council, my fellow council people, to serve on our city council, but then later I've been elected by our citizens. I stepped up because I really felt that not only was I qualified, but I had a specific skill set to offer our city and to offer the council at a unique period in our city's history. And I felt that I would be willing to work with not only the council, but our City of Beachwood's employees, the safety forces, and the leadership, whom I have a great deal of respect for. They are all outstanding individuals in their respective areas. I work with them in a variety of ways, not only to serve our citizens, but this Northeastern Ohio community, as you've seen just by the legislation that was passed this week. In response to the caller, let me say this. It is very important that we keep in mind that we speak about diversity not for diversity's sake, not for window dressing, and not for putting a person in a position simply because of their gender or because of their race. That is not something that I support. And I truly am one that believes in the competitive process and being able to compete. And I believe that, and I understand what Ms. Carrington referenced when she talked about the equity component as well. The council president position is a very, very important position. I understand it well because I chair another role on a state level. I work very closely with Council President Pasch, and not only was he elected by his fellow council people, the vice president position is also a position that is in our council. And I will say that I hope the council president and vice president feel that my style is one that is respectful and thoughtful and complementary to their leadership. And it's so important that we all remember that as we serve the citizens, not ourselves, we serve the citizens, we have a duty to work together for the common good of the city. And it's not about us, it's about the citizens. And what's important is that we keep that first and foremost every day. And so I just wanted to reiterate that point and mention that I keep that in mind as I serve our citizens, and remember that this is an elected position of which those are the duties that I have sworn to uphold.
Councilwoman, thank you so much for your comments. And Council President, also, before you comment on her comments, can you answer the question that Monique Winston has, where all the members of City Council extended an invitation to join this conversation here tonight?
So thank you, Monique, for your question. All members of City Council are on the call. We just felt from a format position that, as President of Council, that I could, try my best to speak and answer questions on our council's behalf, but that if there are specific questions for individual members of council, as I said in the beginning of this call, every member of council is on this call and could certainly answer any questions that you may have. We're trying to limit not having, seven people on a panel, and sometimes that could overcomplicate things. So that's why that decision was made. And I just want to thank Ms. Taylor again for her service to the community, and just incredibly proud to be able to have her as a colleague. And she works incredibly well with council as a whole, with the city administration, and with council leadership, and brings things to the table that there are plenty of things that I don't see, and she's just a great colleague. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. We have a written question from Maury, which is, has the police department been involved in any specific acts of racism prompting this session?
Well, no, this session, as was spelled out by Mr. Pasch, is really generated as a result of national events and some conversations just regarding a need to have the conversation locally, where I think Mr. Pasch stated it very well. We're at an inflection point, and they say timing is everything in life. And you need to take advantage of momentum when you can and when you have it. And we figured that this was a really excellent time to push this conversation forward. I know that the mayor had expressed to me and some others that this was something that had rested on his heart for a while. We wish him a speedy recovery. He wasn't here. He's not here to attend this particular event, but it has his blessings, and no, there was no event that precipitated this.
Great. Just also, this is a question from an email. It's another question from Heidi Solomon. She asks, what is the frequency and intensity of the racial justice training? How are our police officers trained to overcome implicit bias?
So I could take that one. I met yesterday, like I said, with the officer in charge of our training program. When it comes to implicit bias training, which you just asked about, that was recently instituted in the force. So far, 60% of our force is completed it. The other 40% are on their way to completing that training. But more has to be done in this area, and so that's going to be an ongoing conversation that we have with the administration and with an incoming police chief. And some of that's going to be a part of, the police chief interview process. What trainings should we institute that we don't already have instituted? Where could we do better than what we're doing? And I know I ran through the list of trainings earlier this evening, but they didn't include, an anti-racist training the way that you were talking about, or an annual de-escalation training. And so those are all areas where we can make improvements.
Mr. Smith, do you have anything you'd like to add? No? Okay.
No, I think Mr. Pasch covered that well. Thanks.
So Leslie Clark has a written question. She says, speaking of police qualifications, Governor DeWine has a list of recommendations for law enforcement reforms. Is Beechwood studying and considering any or all of those recommendations?
So,
Do you want to take that one first, Mr. Pasch?
sure. I think when it comes to studying recommendations, there's going to be a variety of things the administration is going to look at. And it's everything, including this process and President Obama's pledge that Mayor Horowitz took. It's recommendations from the governor's office. It's the national 8 Can't Wait campaign. It's talking to whomever the incoming new police chief will be about policies that he or she believes need to be instituted. I think there's a constant evolution of trying to think of what we could do better. I don't think it's any one thing, but I do know that, of course, the mayor is going to sit down and evaluate the governor's recommendations and which ones of them we currently meet and which ones we might not.
My answer to that particular question to that individual and to all listeners is, as citizens of Beechwood, you have a say and your voice needs to be heard. And so I think the city has been pretty open with regard to city council meetings. And I know that the mayor has been, he's got an open door policy. Please speak your mind. Again, I'll say that momentum and timing is everything, and this is the time. You have people who are listening. The evidence of that is this forum. It's time to speak.
Most definitely. And so just another quick question, Council President. When it comes to the city, does the city have a diversity and inclusion officer, or is that something that is being thought out? If there isn't one, will someone else take on those responsibilities, or will that be a position all in itself if you guys are considering it?
Yeah, the city currently does not have a diversity inclusion officer. I know that multiple members of City Council have reached out to me. We've had those discussions over the last couple of months. It's something that the administration would also have to be involved in. And, whether or not that is a separate or whether or not those are job responsibilities that would fall in line with somebody who's already an employee in the city is a conversation that we're going to have, but we will get back to you. But we will put extra attention in that area, whether it's with a new employee or a current employee. I also want to make an added tweak to a prior answer. I specifically said there was no specific anti-racism training that was taking part, but there are trainings on racism that are built in to some of the other trainings that the officers are going through. But there are separate trainings that we need to address simultaneously. But I did want to add that caveat.
I understand. And so we also have another question that is written. It's Mr. Smith, it was, I think, the follow-up that you were looking for, where it said, speaking of police oops, wrong one, my apologies. Also, I hear the word recently called residual of racism. A lot of what Ms. Sherry is describing is from the past, but it still affects our current day. And that's why meetings like this are important to keep going in the right direction. Says thank you. Scrolling through, my apologies, that was not it. Here it is from Charles. He said coordination among municipalities would provide a coordinated effort with racism and in dealing with the populace in a more transparent way. In addition, it might allow for a straightforward way in dealing with complaints against the police. So that, I know that a while back you had asked for a follow-up to that one question.
Thanks for that clarification, Charles. Thank you.
So we are all done with the questions. I don't see any more that we have right now. So I'm going to ask the gentleman to, while we wrap this up, this very important conversation, if you guys have any closing remarks about what you've heard here tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Snipes. I want to thank over the 90 plus participants that joined this call this evening. I want to thank you for your insights, your stories, and your questions. and for helping guide the beginning of a conversation. There are changes that will be made in the coming weeks and the coming months. And as we address those changes, we will do so in a transparent manner, and we will come back to you to talk about solutions and how we're solving things and how we're bridging gaps that currently exist in our community. As I stated in the beginning, to me, this is the first of many. And I hope in the future we'll be able to do some of them in person as well. But I want to thank everyone for their participation this evening. I want to thank the chair of our Civil Service Commission, Mr. Smith, for joining us, for all my council colleagues, for being here and for helping us prepare for this evening, and for the mayor who initiated the idea of this town hall. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Ms. Snipes, for hosting the event. And I'll kick it over to you, Mr. Smith.
I'm just going to close my comments by thanking all participants. The questions, both written and stated, vocally were thought-provoking. I hope that we achieved our goal of giving people a voice and starting down this road of clarity and, deliberate discomfort. I think it's really important that we get comfortable with being a little uncomfortable with some of the topics that we discussed. I started saying this and I'll end saying this. These are problems that are centuries old, and we're not going to solve them in one conversation or two or even three, but we can take one step after another and face them square on, as Carrington stated. So thanks for giving us a voice as leaders in the community, and we look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. So just we do have a couple more minutes, and I see that we did have a late add to a question or a comment. So I'll throw that out there since we have a little bit more time, but it's again from Monique. And she says, just a comment, when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity, it is a popular trend right now. It is a discipline that requires the same expertise and experience as any other position, as we should keep that in mind from a school and a city standpoint. And I would say that I think that's exactly what this town hall is doing, and the comments that were made here tonight, and the great and positive dialogue that that happened here tonight, and that will continue with numerous other conversations. Correct, gentlemen?
Yes.
That is correct. That is correct. Thank you, Monique.
Thank you. Thank you, Monique.
And with that, we will say goodnight, and thank you so much for your thoughtful conversation and comments and questions. And you can look to Council President Posh and the other members of council and the city to continue these insightful and powerful conversations to make Beechwood the best city to live in. Right, guys?
Right. Thank you, Darrielle.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Take care. Good night.
Take care. Good night, everyone.